There comes a moment in the evolution of every conscious person when the people around them start to feel wrong. Not wrong in their character necessarily, not evil or malicious, just wrong. Out of alignment, operating at a frequency that grates against your own. The conversations feel hollow. The concerns feel trivial. The way they move through the world feels like watching someone sleepwalk. And the worst part is that you can't quite articulate why, which makes you question yourself. Maybe you're becoming arrogant. Maybe you're the problem. Maybe you've lost touch with normal life. The Stoics would tell you that this discomfort is not a problem. It's a signal. It's your consciousness trying to tell you that you've outgrown your environment. Growth is not comfortable. It's not supposed to be. When you develop yourself, when you build discipline and depth and the capacity to engage with difficulty, you don't become a better version that fits more easily into the world. You become something that fits less easily, that clashes more sharply with mediocrity. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius was surrounded by sycophants and courtiers who told him what he wanted to hear, who concerned themselves with trivial palace politics while he grappled with the fate of an empire. Epictetus watched his fellow slaves accept their condition without question while he cultivated an inner freedom that made him freer than most free men. They understood what you're starting to understand. That development creates distance. But here's where it gets tricky. Not all distance is growth. Sometimes you're just becoming judgmental, condescending, using the language of self-improvement to justify your own arrogance. Sometimes what you think is evolution is just ego dressed in philosophical clothes. The Stoics were ruthless about this distinction. They knew that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, doesn't need to look down on others, doesn't derive its sense of superiority from comparison. True strength is quiet, self-contained, indifferent to external validation. So how do you know? How do you distinguish between genuine outgrowth and simple arrogance? How do you know when it's time to create distance from people versus when you need to humble yourself and recognize that the problem is your own inflated sense of development? The answer lies in specific signs, patterns that reveal themselves when you've genuinely evolved beyond your current social environment. These signs are not about feeling superior. They're about feeling misaligned, and that difference matters more than you might think. The weak person is not weak because they lack strength. They're weak because they refuse to develop it. They have the same capacity you have, the same potential, but they've made different choices. They've chosen comfort over growth, avoidance over engagement, complaint over action. And these choices compound. Year after year, they become more entrenched in patterns that keep them exactly where they are, while you've been walking a different path. This creates a gap, and that gap manifests in ways that are subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. You might feel guilty about noticing this gap. You might try to ignore it, to pretend everyone's on the same level, to maintain relationships that feel increasingly draining. The Stoics would tell you that this guilt is misplaced compassion. True compassion does not require you to lower yourself. It does not require you to participate in dysfunction. It does not require you to drown alongside people who refuse to swim. You can wish people well. You can hope for their development. You can even offer help when asked. But you are not obligated to stay small so others feel comfortable with your size. Seneca wrote about this with characteristic bluntness. He observed that most people are not living their own lives. They're living reactions to other people's lives, following scripts they never consciously chose, pursuing goals they don't actually want because everyone else is pursuing them. And when you stop doing this, when you start living deliberately according to principles you've consciously adopted, you become alien to them. They can't understand why you don't care about the things they care about. Why you're not impressed by what impresses them. Why you're not afraid of what terrifies them. This alienation is not a failure. It's evidence. Evidence that you've done the work, that you've changed in fundamental ways, that you're no longer content with the level of existence that satisfied you before. But it requires you to be honest about what you're seeing, to name the patterns that reveal who has grown and who has chosen stagnation. The 6 signs we're about to explore are not weapons to use against people. They're mirrors. Look into them carefully. See yourself reflected. Make sure you're not the weak person you think you've outgrown. The first sign is that you've stopped participating in complaint as entertainment. Weak people bond over grievance. They gather to rehearse their victimhood, to compete over who has it worse, to spend hours dissecting problems without any intention of solving them. The conversation is not about finding solutions. It's about finding validation for remaining stuck. You used to participate in this. Maybe you even initiated it. But something shifted. You started to notice that these conversations drained you, that they went in circles, that nothing ever changed despite endless analysis. Now when someone launches into complaint mode, you feel a kind of cognitive dissonance. Part of you wants to be supportive, to listen, to sympathize. But another part recognizes the pattern. They're not looking for help, they're looking for an audience. They want you to agree that life is unfair, that their situation is impossible, that they have no agency. And you can't do it anymore. Not because you've become callous, but because you've learned that this kind of conversation reinforces the very helplessness it claims to describe. The Stoic does not deny difficulty. Marcus faced plague, war, betrayal, the death of children. His life was objectively more difficult than most people's complaints warrant. But he did not bond over victimhood. He did not gather courtiers to rehearse how unfair it all was. He acknowledged difficulty and then asked, "What is the virtuous response? What is within my control? How can I meet this with dignity?" This shift from complaint to agency is one of the clearest markers of genuine development. When you try to redirect complaint conversations toward solutions, you'll notice something revealing. The weak person resists. They have reasons why nothing will work, why every suggestion has been tried, why their situation is uniquely impossible. They're not interested in solutions. They're interested in remaining innocent, in maintaining the narrative that they're powerless. This is the essence of weakness, the refusal to take ownership, to accept that how you respond to circumstances is always within your control, even when the circumstances themselves are not. The second sign is that their priorities feel increasingly trivial to you. What they consider important, what they spend hours discussing and worrying about, strikes you as surface-level distraction. Status symbols, social media metrics, petty workplace politics, who said what about whom, consumer goods that promise happiness but deliver only momentary satisfaction. You're not judging these things as inherently wrong. You're just noticing that they don't move you anymore. That dedicating mental energy to them feels like a waste of the finite consciousness you have. This is delicate territory. You must be careful not to confuse depth with pretension. The person who looks down on everyone else's interests while pursuing their own narrow obsessions is not deep. They're just arrogant. True depth recognizes that different people find meaning in different places. But it also recognizes that some pursuits develop you and some deplete you, that some concerns expand your capacity while others shrink it. The Stoics had a practice they called the view from above. They would mentally zoom out, seeing their lives from a distance, from the perspective of eternity. From this view, many concerns that seemed urgent revealed themselves as trivial. Many sources of anxiety revealed themselves as manufactured. This wasn't about becoming detached or uncaring. It was about distinguishing between what genuinely matters and what merely feels urgent in the moment. When you develop this perspective, conversations change. Someone spends 30 minutes analyzing a celebrity's behavior, and you feel a kind of bewildered sadness. Not for them, but for the time, for the consciousness being poured into something so empty. Someone obsesses over minor status distinctions at work, and you recognize the ego game being played, the way they're letting external hierarchies define their internal worth. You used to play these same games. That's why you recognize them so clearly now. The third sign is that they avoid discomfort while you've learned to seek it. This might be the most fundamental distinction. Weak people organize their entire lives around comfort, around avoiding anything that feels difficult or uncertain. They stay in jobs that bore them because change feels risky. They maintain relationships that drain them because loneliness feels scary. They never challenge their own beliefs because cognitive dissonance feels uncomfortable. They've built a life that is small and safe and suffocating. You've learned something they haven't. That growth lives on the other side of discomfort. That every meaningful development in your life came from doing something that scared you, from facing something you wanted to avoid, from sitting with difficulty long enough to learn from it. The Stoics called this voluntary hardship. They deliberately practiced discomfort, not because they were masochistic, but because they understood that comfort makes you weak, that ease makes you fragile, that the person who avoids all difficulty becomes incapable of handling the difficulty that life inevitably brings. Marcus would practice sleeping on hard ground. Epictetus would fast. Seneca would take cold baths and wear rough clothing. These weren't punishments. These were training. They were building the capacity to be okay when things weren't okay. They were inoculating themselves against the shock of adversity. When you practice this, when you deliberately choose difficulty, you build a kind of psychological resilience that weak people lack. You're not afraid of discomfort anymore. You know you can handle it. The fourth sign manifests in how they respond to your growth. When you share something you've learned, something you're working on, some way you're trying to develop yourself, watch what happens. The weak person feels threatened. They don't say this directly. Instead, they minimize your effort. They point out exceptions to prove your approach won't work. They share stories of people who tried similar things and failed. They ask questions that seem genuine but are actually designed to undermine your confidence. This response comes from fear. Your growth reminds them of their stagnation. Your effort highlights their avoidance. Your willingness to be uncomfortable makes their comfort-seeking feel like the weakness it is. They don't want you to fail because they hate you. They want you to fail because your success would force them to confront truths about themselves they're not ready to face. So they subtly, sometimes unconsciously, try to pull you back down to their level. The Stoics experienced this constantly. When Marcus spoke of virtue and self-discipline, retrii continui's courtiers rolled their eyes. When Epictetus taught philosophy to his students, critics mocked the idea that a former slave could have wisdom to offer. When Seneca lived simply despite his wealth, people accused him of hypocrisy. The person committed to development will always face resistance from those committed to staying the same. This is not personal. This is predictable, and recognizing it is crucial. When you've genuinely outgrown weak people, you stop needing their validation. You share less. You explain less. You've learned that not everyone deserves access to your inner world, that some people will use what you share against you, that pearls before swine is not just a metaphor but a practical warning. You become more selective about who gets to know what you're working on, what you care about, what you're struggling with. This isn't secrecy. This is discernment. The fifth sign reveals itself in crisis. When difficulty arrives, when circumstances become challenging, weak people collapse into helplessness or explode into chaos. They panic. They blame. They fragment. They need constant reassurance, constant attention, constant validation that their reaction is justified. And they want you to join them in this state. to validate that the situation is indeed as terrible as they're making it, to participate in the emotional storm they've created. But you've learned something different. You've learned that circumstances are neutral until you judge them. That difficulty is just information, just the next thing requiring your response. The Stoics didn't deny that bad things happened. They denied that bad things had the power to destroy you unless you let them. When Marcus faced the Antonine Plague, when a third of the empire's population died, he didn't collapse. He governed. When Seneca was exiled, when everything was taken from him, he wrote some of his most profound philosophy. When Epictetus was enslaved, when his body belonged to another, his mind remained free. This capacity to remain coherent during difficulty is perhaps the clearest marker of genuine strength. Weak people need calm circumstances to feel calm. Strong people carry their calm with them into chaos. When crisis comes and you watch how people respond, you see who has done the internal work and who has only pretended to. The person who fragments at the first sign of trouble, who needs you to manage their emotions while you're dealing with your own challenges, that person has revealed their weakness. You find yourself becoming less available for these emotional rescues. Not because you don't care, but because you recognize that managing someone else's reactions to difficulty doesn't help them. It enables them. It reinforces their belief that they can't handle things without external support. True compassion sometimes looks like letting people struggle, like maintaining your own composure while they learn to find theirs. The sixth sign is the most subtle and perhaps the most significant. You notice that they don't actually want what they say they want. They talk about change but resist changing. They speak of growth but avoid growing. They claim to want freedom but cling to their chains. They describe the life they wish they had while making no moves toward it. And when you point this out gently, when you offer concrete steps they could take, they have 1,000 reasons why now isn't the right time, why their situation is different, why they'll start tomorrow. The Stoics called this living in contradiction, saying one thing and doing another. They saw it as the fundamental human disease. We're all capable of it. The difference is that some people notice the contradiction and work to resolve it, while others spend their entire lives in this state of cognitive dissonance, never bringing their actions into alignment with their stated values. They want the results of discipline without the practice of discipline. They want the benefits of courage without the experience of fear. They want transformation without discomfort. You've stopped living this way, or you're actively working to stop. You've learned that what you do is who you are, that intentions mean nothing compared to actions, that you cannot think your way into a different life, you can only act your way there. This creates a fundamental incompatibility with people still living in the fantasy that wanting something is the same as working toward it. Seneca wrote, "It's not that we don't have enough time. It's that we waste most of it." Weak people waste their time on complaint, on distraction, on empty socializing, on consuming rather than creating. Then they wonder why nothing changes. They have the same amount of time you have. They just spend it differently. And those different choices, accumulated over months and years, create the gap you're noticing now. Here's what you need to understand about outgrowing people. It's not a judgment of their worth as humans. Every person has inherent value. Every person deserves respect, but not every person deserves access to your time, your energy, your inner world. The Stoics distinguished between cosmopolitan love for humanity in general and selective association with specific individuals. You can wish well for everyone while choosing to walk closely with only a few. The weak person takes this personally. When you create distance, when you become less available, when you stop participating in their patterns, they interpret it as rejection. And in a sense, it is. You're rejecting their level of operation. You're rejecting the invitation to stay small. You're rejecting the implicit agreement that you'll all remain comfortable together rather than challenge each other to grow. This rejection is necessary. It's not cruel. It's honest. Marcus was emperor. He could not simply dismiss everyone who operated at a lower level. He had to govern, to work with people of varying capacity and commitment. So he developed what we might call compassionate detachment. He did his duty to them. He treated them with respect. But he didn't let their weakness become his weakness. He didn't lower his standards to match theirs. He didn't participate in their games or adopt their concerns as his own. He remained anchored in his principles while navigating a world of people who shared few of those principles. You can do the same. You don't have to cut people off dramatically. You don't have to announce that you've outgrown them. You simply become less available. You stop engaging with certain topics. You redirect certain conversations. You spend your time differently. You let the relationships naturally adjust to your new level of operation. Some relationships will end. Some will transform into something more superficial but still pleasant. And a few will evolve, with the other person rising to match your growth. But let's be clear about something crucial. If you're using these signs as a checklist to judge everyone around you, if you're walking through life feeling superior to those poor, weak people who haven't achieved your enlightenment, then you've missed the entire point. True strength doesn't need to compare itself to weakness. True development doesn't require an audience of lesser people to validate itself. The Stoic sage doesn't look down on others. The sage barely notices others in that sense, because they're too focused on their own development, their own practice, their own alignment with virtue. The recognition that you've outgrown certain people should feel sad, not triumphant. It should feel like a natural evolution that requires distance, not like a victory that proves your superiority. If you feel pride about it, that's ego. If you feel relief mixed with melancholy, that's probably authentic. You're grateful for what those relationships taught you, sad that they can't continue in their current form, and clear that you need to honor your own growth by surrounding yourself with people who challenge rather than comfort you. Here's the paradox. The more you genuinely develop, the less you need to identify as developed. The person who constantly talks about their growth, who positions themselves as more evolved than others, who uses spiritual or philosophical language to establish hierarchy, that person is still weak. They're just weak in a more sophisticated way. True strength is quiet. True development is humble. It doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. Epictetus taught that the mark of the progressing student is that they stop talking about principles and start living them. They stop seeking praise for their practice and simply practice. They stop needing others to recognize their development because they've found validation in the development itself. When you reach this point, when your growth becomes self-sustaining rather than dependent on external recognition, you've moved beyond weakness in its most subtle form. So what do you do with this recognition? How do you navigate the space between where you are and where the people around you remain? First, you practice what the Stoics called sympatheia, the recognition that we're all connected, all struggling with the human condition, all doing the best we can with the understanding we currently have. The weak person is not your enemy. They're someone operating with different priorities, different understanding, different capacity in this moment. Second, you lead by example rather than by explanation. You don't try to convince people they should change. You don't lecture them on their weakness or preach about your principles. You simply live differently. You respond to difficulty with equanimity while they panic. You maintain your boundaries while they collapse into others. You pursue meaning while they pursue comfort. Some will notice. Some will ask. Some will be inspired to examine their own patterns. Most won't, and that's fine. Third, you build new connections with people operating at your level or beyond. This is not about finding an echo chamber of people who think exactly like you. It's about surrounding yourself with people who challenge you to continue growing, who model qualities you want to develop, who won't let you settle for less than your potential. The Stoics sought out teachers and peers who had walked further along the path. They knew that environment shapes development, that you become like the people you spend time with. Fourth, you maintain compassion without sacrificing standards. You can be kind to weak people without enabling their weakness. You can be patient with their process without accepting their invitation to join them in stagnation. You can offer help when genuinely asked without taking responsibility for changes only they can make. This balance between compassion and boundaries is where wisdom lives. The ultimate sign that you've outgrown weak people is this: you stop thinking about it so much. You stop categorizing people as weak or strong. You stop defining yourself in relation to others' level of development. You become absorbed in your own practice, your own growth, your own alignment with virtue. The distance happens naturally, without drama, without resentment, without the need to justify or explain. Marcus wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." The best response to weakness is not judgment but continued growth. Not separation but transcendence. Not superiority but indifference to the comparison itself. When you've truly outgrown weak people, you barely notice you have. You're too busy becoming stronger. If you're walking this path, if you recognize these signs not as weapons but as mirrors, if you're committed to growth even when it creates distance, subscribe to this channel. We explore the Stoic path to strength not as theory but as practice, not as judgment of others but as development of self. The journey outward requires the journey inward. Keep walking.